Hello, everybody. In this video, we are going to talk about one of the most important issues related to conducting a study and reporting that. And it's about research ethics board approval. I can tell you that if you come up with the most novel research questions and you use the most rigorous research methodology to answer that research question, but you didn't consider receiving approval from your research ethics board before conducting your study, you may not be able to publish your study in any journal. And it's very important for you to know which types of study need to be presented to research ethics board for approval and what type of study you don't need for research board approval. So research ethics board, which has different names in different universities in different contexts. Sometimes they are called Institutional Review Board or IRB. Sometimes they are called ethics committees or so on. Usually they assess the ethical acceptability of the research through consideration of foreseeable risks, the potential benefits, and the ethical implications of the research, both at the stage of the initial REB review and also throughout the life of the project. So approval of research ethics board is not something just about the start of your study. Throughout your study, there might something happen in your study that needs reviewing by research ethics board. For example, when you have severe or serious adverse events, they might be needed to present it to research ethics board. They may need to consider some other elements for approval of your study. So this is a continuous project. The constitution of research ethics board, usually there are 5 members, 2 experts in the relevant field, 1 ethicist, 1 person who is knowledgeable in the relevant law, and 1 community member, or the person who is not affiliated to the institute. So what type of studies need research ethics board approval? All studies, all research that involves living human participants need research approval. So whatever you work with people, whatever you do something on people, for example, interventional approach to people, human participants, you need REB approval. And there is no excuse not to apply for REB approval before starting your study. Even when you are working with human biological materials, as well as human embryos, fetuses, fetal issues, reproductive material, and stem cells, you need REB approval. So although you are not working with living human participants, you are working with human biologicals, you again need to ask approval from the related ethics committee or REB of your universities. And even these mandatory rule applies to materials derived from living and deceased individuals. So when you are working with fetal tissues, whether that fetus is alive or deceased, you need approval working on them. When you're working with people on educational purposes, for example, course-based research activities, and you are doing these educational activities for answering a research question, and the main purpose of this activity is educational, again, as you are working with people, you need to ask for REB approval. So there is a difference between the time that you go to a classroom and teach something without thinking about a research or a study, or when you come up with a research question and you do an educational activity to answer that research question. The second one is considered research, and for research on human, even educational, you need approval from REB before starting your study. There are some pilot studies in which there are smaller versions of the main study when you recruit fewer participants, or the duration of your study is shorter than usual studies. Even these pilot studies, because you are working with participants, they need REB approval. Sometimes you do these pilot studies for assessment of the feasibility or to inform the design of a subsequent study intended to address a research question. As again, there is research question, this is considered a study, this is considered research, and you need REB approval before starting the study. There are some other types of studies called minimal risk research. And this minimal risk, when we say minimal risk, we mean those studies in which the probability of possible harms to participants are no longer or are no greater than those in their everyday life that relate to the research. So although these are minimal risk and you don't put extra risk to patients or participants, these studies need REB approval as well. So either pilot study or minimal risk research, you need to apply for REB approval. So this is a good example from one of the articles published in a journal published by IMR Press, and in the section related to ethics approval and consent to participate, it's read as, we have signed a scientific research coordination agreement with the Department of Pathology at the first affiliated hospital of Koning Medical University and submitted the approval document, and they provided the approval number. Also, they have mentioned that the obstetric department of the First People Hospitals of Yunnan Province, with approval from the Medical Ethics Committee of the First People's Hospital of Yunnan Province, approved the study. So these researchers provided the related approval number and mentioned the name of the ethics committees and the universities that those ethics committees affiliated to those universities. This is the standard approach for providing information about Research Ethics Board approval. The important point to consider is that, and as I mentioned several times during the last slides that I shared with you, is that Research Ethics Board approval should be sought before the start of research. After the start of research, you cannot apply for research approval. So before the first patient recruitment, you need to apply for research ethics approval. There is an example in one of the articles submitted to one of the journals published by IMR Press. And in this part of participants and method, we read that the study was done from January 2019 to December 2020, but the approval number relates to 2023, which means that in this randomized study, they did their study, and later on, after some years, they applied for research approval so that they could be publish the results of materials they gathered 4 years earlier. This is not a good and a standard approach. Journals don't accept these approvals, and publishers cannot publish your study based on such activities. So these are the type of studies that our REBs should approve in advance. There are some types of studies that are exempt from REB approval. For example, those studies relies exclusively on information that's publicly available through a mechanism set out by legislation or regulation, and that's protected by law. For example, registries of deaths, court judgment, public archives, and publicly available statistics. So all these information that are publicly available and you are allowed to use those information without any restriction, they are exempt from REB approval. So you can refer to registries of death and gather information. You are not working with people, you are not working with that person, you are working on data, and it is okay. Or some other public archives, you can just refer to them. If their archives are publicly available by regulation and by legislation, you are allowed to use those data. The second type is when you are studying some ideas on public domain, when there is no expectation of privacy. For example, publications that are accessible in public library. You can use the data available in those public libraries when there is no expectation of privacy. Cyber materials, such as documents, records, performances, online archival materials, or published third-party interviews to which the public is given uncontrolled access on the internet, and for which there is no expectation of privacy, they are exempt from REB approval. However, you need to consider that these materials shouldn't be copyrighted. If they are copyrighted, there are some legal limitations on using those materials. This is different from REB approval. The important point is that when you are doing a study on online groups with restricted membership, these type of studies need REB approval because of the privacy expectation in these restricted membership. So these membership that are restricted tells you that there might be some privacy expectation, and for which you need REB approval. Also, those studies involving the observation of people in public. You just observe people in public without any intervention or direct interaction with people. This can be exempt from REB approval. Also, you need to consider that those targeted individuals shouldn't have reasonable expectation of privacy. So if they expect privacy, you cannot do that. And also, dissemination of research results doesn't allow identification of specific individuals. So with these three conditions, when you are conducting studies by just observing the people in public places, you don't need REB approval, and REB approval exempt your study from more evaluation. So if there is no intervention or direct interaction with people, when targeted individuals have no reasonable expectation of privacy, and when dissemination of research results doesn't allow identification of specific individuals. However, you need to consider that epidemiological observational studies, such as cohort studies, case control studies, cross-sectional studies that involve personal health information, needs REB approval because health information is considered to be private. So when you review the medical charts of patients admitted to hospital during a period of time, and based on those data, you come up with a research question and conduct a study, this needs REB approval because medical information of patients is considered to be private. Also, studies that relies exclusively on secondary use of anonymous information or anonymous human biological materials, so long as the process of data linkage or recording or dissemination of results doesn't generate identification information, can be exempt from REB approval. Of course, there might be some differences in different jurisdictions, so the best approach is to prepare your protocol, submit that to your REB, and if this study is among those that are exempt from REB approval, they will inform you that your study doesn't need REB approval. There are some activities that are not considered as research. Those activities usually don't require a research ethics board review. For example, when you are evaluating the quality of the job that you done regularly, quality assurance activities, quality improvement activities, program evaluation activities, or testing within normal educational requirements, when used exclusively for assessment, for management, or improvement purposes, as these activities don't have a research question to answer, they don't constitute research. So when we evaluate the quality of what we do, when we do some activities to improve the quality of what we do, when we evaluate the programs that are run in our factory, for example, or when we do some educational activities and test participants in that educational activities without any research question to answer, they are called just activities. They are not research, for which they don't need research ethics board review, because as they are not research, they will not publish in peer review publication. So these are very short overview of those studies that need REB approval and what you need to do. Thank you very much for considering this series of videos. We will be with you with another educational video very shortly. Thank you very much.